Number 1. I am female. At the time of this story, I lived in the worst part of downtown Portland, right behind the projects. I know I shouldn't have been riding the bus late at night, but there are some circumstances that just can't be helped. One Friday night in April, my boyfriend was hosting his birthday celebration with a big group of friends. I work on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, so I had been a bit annoyed about his choice of timing, but I understood it was the most convenient for everyone else, so it's all he could do. Since I worked early the next morning, this meant I had to ride the bus home late at night. The ride home was about 40 minutes. I had never been bothered about being on the bus late at night. However, this night felt different. Around the time I started heading home, I got this terrible, foreboding feeling. I armed myself with my pocket knife and started the journey home, which was well past 11 p.m. The ride began entirely normal, but the feeling never subsided. I was very aware of everything happening around me. Soon, I decided to text my roommate to see if he would be in the same area around the time I was, as he had finished work, similar to that time anyway. Soon, I got a reply that he'd been relieved early from work, but was turning around to wait at my bus stop. I'm still glad I made the decision to text him, as it may have saved my life. One stop before I was due to get off the bus, this obese guy with green hair and a pit bull gets on the bus. I didn't see him notice me or anything, so I went about minding my own business. The stop at which he got on was only a few blocks away from mine. I got to my stop and was greeted by my roommate. Here's where it gets creepy. The guy that had just gotten on the bus gets off at this stop also. As my roommate and I started walking home, this guy starts trying to keep pace with us and gets way too close to me. My roommate and I are fast, walking on the edge of a sidewalk, so it's very obvious that this guy is trying to get close to me for some reason. My roommate notices as well, and we fell silent. We managed to outpace him and turn a sharp corner. I look back to the guy and give him the what the fuck kind of look. But at that moment, I noticed he had stopped walking where we turned, and is now taking pictures of me with his flash on. This is the dead of night on a sidewalk with some crusty office buildings. Nothing worth taking pictures of. It scares me that I never followed my instincts and contacted my roommate. Things may have turned out worse. So, creepy bus guy who took pictures of me, let's never meet again. Number 2. This happened about 4 years ago when I was 16 and a few weeks away from beginning my senior year of high school. My mum and I were taking a trip out to New Jersey to visit my aunt, who we hadn't seen in a relatively long time. We arrived early in the afternoon and we had a great time. I was catching up with my aunt and nothing out of the ordinary happened during our visit. It was around 9 o'clock by the time we left my aunt's house, and took about 20 minutes for us to hop onto the turnpike. About half an hour into our drive, my mum noticed that we had only had a quarter tank full of gas left, and decided to stop at the nearest gas station to fill up. We asked the attendant to fill up our tank with $20 worth of gas, and while she was pumping the gas, I asked my mum if I could grab a bottle of water from the store real quick. She said sure, and handed me a few dollars. She asked me if I could grab her a pack of gum as well, while I was in there, and she told me she'd pull into the parking lot on the left side of the store, once the attendant was finished. I walked into the store, grabbed everything, and waited in line to be checked out. The line was a little long, so it took about 5 minutes until I'd paid for everything and walked out of the store. I turned right and began walking towards the car when I noticed a man standing next to my mum's window, talking to her. And all of a sudden, I hear my mum yell at him, "Get the fuck away from me, you sick bastard!" I ran up to the man, got in his face, and yelled, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" The man was probably in his late 30s. He was wearing a Yankees t-shirt and black shorts. He had very dark brown eyes, jet black hair, and a pretty dishevelled moustache to top it all off. He was very sickly looking, and looked a bit thinner than he should have, for his height, to which he was probably about 5'7" and 130 pounds. He began freaking out, apologising profusely, and saying it was all a misunderstanding and that he had deserved a second chance. I screamed, "Get the fuck out of here before I smash your face onto the concrete." He ran off and got into his black car that was parked on the other side of the lot and drove off. I got into the car and asked my mum what had happened while I was in the store. She said the man walked up to her and asked for directions to Jersey City. She answered his question to the best of her abilities, to which he thanked her, smiled, and said, "You're very beautiful, you know that?" My mum has had creeps try and hit on her before, and she had this feeling that this guy was a creep right from the get-go. So she thanked him for the compliment and showed him the wedding ring on her finger and said she was already taken, hoping it would deter him, as it usually worked in the past. He started rambling on about how she's in an abusive marriage, and he can tell by the look on her face that if she gave him a chance, he would treat her right. He also said disgusting things about her and what he wanted to do if they had sex. My mum screamed at him to get away from her, and then cue me walking out of the store and scaring him off. We drove out of the gas station and eventually put what had happened in the back of our minds. About an hour into the drive, I looked into the side mirror, and I noticed a car following behind us. The highway was pretty well lit, so I recognized it was the car that belonged to the man we had encountered earlier. I told my mum about it. She says that she noticed the car following us for the past 10 minutes. She said he was going to get off at the next stop and try and lose him. We got off at the next stop and quickly began making numerous turns down the side blocks and also sped down them to try and lose the creep following us. He followed without fail for about 5 minutes, until my mum passed an intersection and the man sped up to try and keep up with us, but was forced to slam on his brakes when the light turned red and cars already had begun passing by. My mum used this opportunity to speed up and turn down another block. She pulled into a McDonald's parking lot and made sure to park behind the building. She turned the car off and we waited about 10 minutes just to be sure we had lost the creep. I was pretty anxious at this point, and I knew my mother was too, but she managed to stay pretty well composed despite our current situation. We assumed we had lost him, and my mum turned the car back on and we drove towards the block that would let us back onto the highway. We turned onto the road and it was pretty well lit, but it was relatively empty, save for us and the occasional vehicle passing by. Not even a minute later, we see a car speeding up towards us in the distance, until we see that it's the same creep from before. My mum and I were flipping shit at this point, and we just wanted this fucking crazy man to go away. Our luck must have spiked at that point, because all of a sudden, we see red and blue lights flashing in the distance, and a police siren that was getting louder by the second. A cop must have been hiding somewhere, or was about to turn onto the road when they had seen the creep speeding and proceeded to chase after him. He speeds past us with the cop following him, presumably trying to evade him. Relieved, We turned back onto the highway and continued our drive home. We were both shaken up quite a bit from what had just happened, but we calmed down after a while. We were both just glad that we had gotten away from that creepy man, and that nothing bad had happened to us. The rest of our drive home went uneventful, thankfully, and we made it home safe. So, creepy man who tried to follow my mother and I home, let's not ever meet again, or else I'll be sure to smash your face against the concrete, like I had threatened to do at that very gas station. Number 3. Let me start with a little backstory. I was 28 when this happened. My daughter was 8. My wife, her mother was hospitalised with pneumonia. The hospital she was in is about 2 hours from our house. Visiting hours ended at 9 p.m. It was a Friday night, and since my daughter hadn't seen her mummy in a few days, we went and stayed till the nurses made us leave. It was almost 10 p.m. when we had finally pulled out of the hospital parking lot. At the time, cell phones were still very expensive. The car I owned at the time was an old Pontiac Sunfire, and decided to give up the ghost about an hour from home. So, it's dark, lonely, middle of nowhere in the hills of Kentucky. Everything is good as we head home. My baby girl was talking about what kind of handmade card she was making for Mummy when we got home. The radio was off, and like I said, all was good. Then it wasn't. The car stalled and refused to start again. I managed to pull into the shoulder of the road and told my baby to lock the door and not unlock it for anyone except me. She nodded and proceeded to hit the button. I raised the hood and tried to see if I could spot any obvious reason for the engine to die. Of course, there wasn't one. After a few minutes of checking fuses, checking for fuel pressure, etc., I decided that the car was a lost cause, and that we had to get the hell home. It was a secluded, back country road, and there wasn't any houses for about a mile and a half from where we were. I told my baby to get out of the car, and I put her up on my shoulders. We walked for about 10 minutes before headlights approached from behind. I won't say that I was not relieved when an older couple pulled up and offered us a ride to their house. They explained that they lived just a few miles from where I told them we lived, and that they had been to his sister's house for dinner and were on their way home. And since it was on the way, they didn't mind giving us a ride. I accepted and climbed into the back seat with my little girl. We ride in silence for a few miles when the older woman starts talking to my daughter. She talked about animals, farms, and simple stuff that kids enjoy hearing about. As they talked, I noticed the old man's eyes in the rear-view mirror, lingering in my daughter's area. I quickly moved over and picked up my daughter, placing her on the other side of me, next to the rear passenger side door. The old man huffed a little bit, and the woman continued to talk. That's when I noticed that the woman was looking behind her, beside the seat, and staring oddly at my baby. By now, we were a few blocks from the house, and I told them to stop the car and to let us out, that we would go to my brother's house that was just there. Before my daughter could say anything about me not having a brother, I squeezed her hand a little, and she just stopped. The man argued with me for a second, and didn't want to stop the car. He acted like I had insulted him, and proceeded to say stuff like, "Well, the girl wants to stay with us, but you can get out," and "I wasn't planning on this shit." By now, I was scared, and severely pissed off. I politely told the man to stop the car, then and now, or I'd take his I would Rio his face off and use it to gag him. He stopped, and as we got out, the woman turned to my daughter saying, "Remember, I said you can come and play with my horses any time, sweetie." Then turning to the old man, she said, "What did you do? We were almost there. Did you see her? What's wrong with you?" The old woman's last sentence was muffled by me slamming her door and walking to the first house with lights still on. I called the police, gave a report, and they took us home from there. A few days later, I took it upon myself to drive by where they said they lived. The house was empty, and had been for quite a while. I still call the county sheriff every now and then to see if they ever found anything out. Nope. Hey, creepy old fucks, let's not meet again. Number 4. When I was about 11 or 12, we lived in a small house made of mud and stone, a lot like houses now. It was 2 of my brothers and I in the house. Everyone else had gone to the James feast, and we had left to tend the sheep. We were getting ready for bed when we heard the dogs going crazy outside. Thinking it was nothing more than coyotes howling in the distance, we told him to be quiet. We began to drift off to sleep, and the dogs would not shut up. Somehow, I was able to go to sleep for a few hours. Then I woke up very late in the night. It was very quiet and still in the house, save for my brother's snoring and hearing and breathing. I realized I needed to use the outhouse and woke up my brother to take me out there. He teased me about being scared, which I certainly was. We went out with our flashlight to the outhouse. The dogs began with their crazed barking out in the sagebrush, going from one place to the next. My brother went first, and I waited outside for him. While waiting, I tried to follow the dogs with my flashlight. Suddenly, there was a very loud whine from one of the dogs. Then everything went quiet again. It was really too quiet for that time of year. Not even the sheep were making any noise. Suddenly, I heard a few of the dogs going completely mad by the truck. When I looked over there was this man. He was unbelievably tall, leaning one arm on the cab roof of the truck. He was looking at the dogs for a little, and then suddenly kicking one of them. They all scattered in different directions. The thing looked up at me, and I saw its face. It had a pure white face, like a full moon. 2 burning red eyes, and a slight smile that was pure black. I could not move or make a sound. It began to walk towards me with long strides, until it finally towered over me. All I began to see was a dark red, like the colour of blood when you cut the throat of a sheep. I was getting deeper and deeper into its eyes. I could faintly hear my brother coming out of the outhouse. With this, the thing looked up at him. Reality began rushing back to me. I noticed that my brother was too distracted with his buckle to realize what was going on. I also noticed these thin, long hands hovering just inches from my head. Its skin was black ash, and he smelled like a bloated dead animal in the summer. I was still unable to move or speak. The Skinwalker began to move towards my brother. Finally, noticing this figure, my brother became paralyzed as I was. Closer and closer it drew, reaching an arm out towards my brother's head. Something finally snapped in me. I became unbearably angry. I broke from the trance and lunged at the Skinwalker, raising my arms like a wild animal and baring my teeth at it. A growl came out that I never knew I could make. I became more and more angry at the thing that was trying to hurt us. It kept that smile at first, but the angrier I got, the more the smile faded. Finally, with everything I had, I began to make this primal roar. It fell backwards and ran away into the night. Looking back at me, its eyes were dim and dull, its smile now long since gone. The next morning, the family returned home from the feast. After relaying the story to my parents, they quickly hired a medicine man. Number 5. My father told me a story once. I'll never forget it, for a few reasons. I think it's the first story he ever told me as a child. It's also the story of how my grandfather died, but honestly, that isn't the reason. You hear stories on TV, or sometimes you overhear something in a public place. People talk about ghosts and aliens, and you think to yourself, that isn't real, they're making it up, or they're mistaken, or they're crazy, or something like that. You just can't believe it. Until something happens, something that brings it all together, connects the dots in a way you didn't think of before. Maybe it happens to you. Maybe you hear the same story again and again, happening to different people. It doesn't take long for the world to become a lot bigger than you thought it was. As I said, this is a story my father told me, but I never believed it, even though he swore up and down it was true. It wasn't until I started clicking around the internet I started to believe. I started to hear other stories just like the one my father told me. It didn't take me long to believe in the Rake. That's not what my father called it, of course. He's never used the internet in his life. He wouldn't know what the consensus he's taking to naming it to. When he chose to call it something other than it, or that thing, he called it Skinwalker, after an old Cherokee tale his grandfather told him. But I'll tell you the story, the way he told it to me. We were out hunting one night, he'd tell me. Coyotes. We'd kill them for $50 a skin. They're living on a dairy farm in Ohio. They'd kill calves sometimes. We'd do it every night, because we needed the money. Sometimes, while we were out, we'd come on a deer and kill it. Our landlord didn't mind, and it could feed our family for a few nights and save us some money. Anyway, we were done making our rounds and heading home, walking, because we didn't have a car or some four-wheeler back then. We'd cut through the woods. That's when we came up on it. Blood everywhere. Splattered on the trees, in the grass, in the creek, everywhere. At first, we figured it was a pack of coyotes. We'd seen it sometimes. They can't scavenge and start hunting deer or cattle. The worst was when they bred with feral dogs. But this wasn't like that. See, when a pack of dogs, or wolves, or coyotes attack something, they do it right. They pick off one that's weak, or sick, or old, or just small. They'll hunt it, draw it into a corner, someplace it can't get out of, and they'll run it right to the biggest one, the alpha. And that deer will never see the alpha. It might hear it, but it won't see it. It'll just notice that its throat's gone, and then it'll drop dead. It's quick, it's clean. That wasn't what happened here. Something had run up on a den of deer. Coyotes won't attack a den. Wolves neither, because they'd get too much of a fight. There were three, I think. 3 bodies, just torn apart. You'd see a head there, a leg there, a torso there. Predators don't do that. They don't leave behind scraps. What had done this hadn't done it for food. It had done it for fun. But we didn't know that. We saw a bunch of carcasses, and we think it's something we got to take care of. I remember my dad telling me to go home. He thought it was a pack of feral dogs, but I wasn't leaving him, and I was damn sure I wasn't walking the 2 miles of wood alone. With nothing but a .22 and a pocket knife. He was only 13 at the time, so a .22 rifle was about the only gun he could reliably use. Dad had the shotgun, and I wasn't going anywhere without it. It took me a while to convince him, but finally we began tracking whatever did that. It wasn't hard. Either we just followed the blood, either that thing had bled a deer before it got away, or it had dragged it for a mile. I don't know. I know that I'd never seen my dad scared before that night. We started hearing noises. I've been in a lot of woods in my life. I've been all over the world, and ain't never heard noises like I heard that night. I heard things screaming. Heard deer and fox and rabbits and raccoons and birds, just scared. Keep in mind, this is maybe 12 or 1 o'clock. Except the fox and some birds, nothing was supposed to even be awake. But they weren't just awake, they were moving. I saw flocks of birds that night fly straight into trees we were just trying to get out of. We came up on a pack of coyotes, nearly shot a couple, thinking it was the thing we were looking for. But then we saw they were running towards us. They ran right past us, didn't even notice us. Then some deer did the same. Then some rabbits, squirrels, foxes, even a couple of wild hogs. These things were supposed to be eating each other, and the only thing they cared about was getting out of there. We should have put it together that maybe the thing we were looking for, it wasn't something we were supposed to see, and it wasn't something we could kill. I don't know why we didn't just go home. I guess we were curious. I think that was my dad's nature, to go towards trouble, to fight, and knowing what I knew about my father, my nature was to stay close to him. We finally get into an open valley, and it was normally a soy field, but it wasn't in season, so it was just flat dirt. We saw the tracks then. A lot of animals fleeing the forest had paved over the land, but where the deer blood was, nothing had taken a single step, like they were leaving it for us to find. The tracks were shallow. Whatever it was couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, but that didn't mean much. A bobcat weighing 40 pounds wet nearly tore off my damn throat once. All that means is it's quick and hard to hit. So, we follow the tracks, and it doesn't take us long to find where it is. There's this old schoolhouse that sits on top of a hill. Half of it had been ripped out by a tornado, but nobody lived there, not for a long time. We caught homeless people in there sometimes, or druggies looking for a safe place to shoot up. We figured maybe that was it. Maybe it was some sick kid riding a high. But we didn't think that for long. We get within 50 yards, and we hear this noise, a screeching kind of sound. It was sort of made up of 2 different sounds. One was a high-pitched screech, another was a low-pitched growl. It was making both at the same time. We get within 20 yards, and we hear this sound. I can remember thinking that it was like paper being torn apart, while someone was swinging water in a bucket, back and forth. Dad looks at me, kneels down, and whispers. I gotta stay behind him, because we're about to corner him. Any animal will fight when it's cornered, especially when it's a predator, but we can tell by the tracks that it's just one. He tells me it's probably a single feral dog, probably vapid. The plan is to sneak up on it while it's eating, shoot it, and then keep shooting it, till it don't move anymore, then slit its throat. If it gets to Dad, it's my job to shoot it or stab it to get it off him. So he walks up, and I'm right behind him, just a tad to his side, so I can hear what it is. I wish to this day I hadn't. It was leaning over a carcass, tears off its flesh, and throws what it doesn't nibble aside. There's blood all over the brick, glistening in the moonlight. It's pale white, human looking, but not quite human. It had arms and legs like a human, but it sat like a monkey, hunched over. Its hands weren't normal. It had long fingers with claws at the end. So we see that, and my dad hesitates. He wasn't about to fire on a person. So he clears his throat to try to get it to turn around. I swear to God, all the noises just ceased. I ain't ever heard true silence before, and not after that. But for 2 seconds, nothing made any noise, which made it all the louder when it turned around, made this shrill cry, and jumped on Dad. He got a shot off. I think it missed. If it hit the thing, it didn't mind, but it was on him. Tears parts off him. I start shooting it with the .22, point blank, but it barely bled the thing. I got off 5 rounds, and then I start hitting it with the gun butt, but it wasn't budging. It didn't even register that I was there. It clawed at my dad, taking bits off his flesh. It started on its torso, ripping off the skin. Then it moved up. It tore off his throat. It tore off his nose, his eyes. It scalped him. Then it started digging in and ripping off the bottom half of his jaw, the little bones that tube in your neck, then his ribs. I don't remember exactly what happened, but somehow my dad's knife ends up in the shoulders thing, and my dad ends up on my back. I'm running, and by God, I'm running faster than I ever have before. And it's following me. I end up back in the woods, opposite the ones we had been in. I'm heading towards my landlord's house, because it's half a mile away. I can hear this thing screeching and moaning. I hear the tree branches crack and get thrown around. It sounds like somebody's taking an axe to every single tree I pass. It's cracking so loud and often, but I just ain't looking back. Finally, I trip into gravel, and I look up, and there's my landlord and a bunch of his buddies, drinking around a campfire. I scream and cry, and they come over. I'm telling them to call an ambulance. He looks at me, and I'll never forget what he said. "What is that on your back?" he asked me. Just as he said it, I saw one of those god-awful flannel shirts my dad wore everywhere. It was what was left of my dad. Most of his head, his torso, but nothing after the waist. Suddenly we hear it, screeching. He grabs me. My dad gets thrown on the ground. I'm fighting him, crying, because I think we can still save him, somehow. But my dad has been gone before I ever picked him up. He has to pick me up and throw me inside before I come with him. He and his buddies were all inside and locking their doors and getting guns. The landlord's asking me, "What happened? What happened?" But I just don't know what to tell him. He's pieced enough of it together to understand that there was something dangerous out there. All the lights in the house are on, and someone calls the cops. They'll be here, but in 15 minutes. We look outside and see it walk in front of the fire they'd made. Don't know what it is. One of them says, "It looks like an ape." Suddenly, something goes through the window. We shoot at it, but ain't a thing. It's my landlord's dog, just the body, though, not its head or legs. We start pushing things in front of doors and windows when we hear something in the garage. I remember one of his friends saying that the doors were open. We hear metal and glass getting ripped apart. We put a couch and a TV in front of the door to the garage. It banged around some more, but then it got quiet. Not silent like it was before. We could hear it move around some, and the guys were talking, making sure the guns were ready. Someone hands me a pistol. No sooner did I cock the hammer back did we hear something shatter upstairs. Then we heard it screech again, except now it was louder, and it didn't echo and fade out because it was inside. We all rushed to the one door leading upstairs, and we got to it just as that thing did. It opened it just a bit, and 4 or 5 men just slammed into it. It got its hand through somehow. Someone with a shotgun took care of that, put the barrel right up to its wrist and pulled the trigger. Cut its hand off clean. That only pissed it off though. It started pushing on that door, clawing. We were on one side, pushing as best as we could, and it was on the other, doing the same. That wood was just not going to hold, so someone tells us to keep our heads down. Suddenly, the top half of the door is just gone. My ears are ringing, and there are splinters everywhere. 2 or 3 of them just unloaded on the top of that door. I don't really know where it went after that. The police got there. I was still glued to that door, what was left of it. The sun was up before they got me off it. They put me in a hospital for a while. A lot of people talked to me, but I didn't talk back, not for a long, long time. When I got back home, I got a job from the landlord, working on the farm. We didn't talk much, not about the thing, but I signed up for the army when I was 19, and he sat me down to drink some scotch as a send-off. I asked him right away what the police told him. The story they went with was a wild animal, probably a wolf, or maybe a bear that migrated north. I asked him how they could say that when they had the hand. He looks at me, stunned. He tells me that hand never made it back to the station. The cop who had it in his car wrecked, drove into a tree, died on impact. The hand was never found, probably taken away by an animal. The cops, when they would acknowledge the hand existed at all, said it was simply the paw of a bear that looked like a human hand. I never talked to the landlord again. He went missing when I was in basic. The cops never found him. They said he owed some money to some people and just ran away. But I don't think it's that simple. I never went back to those woods, and I wouldn't, even if I had the whole goddamn US Army at my back. But that was a lie. When my mother died, I don't think my father felt he had anything left, and that he might as well settle old scores. He went to those woods and never came back. The FBI was called. They did a show for everyone involved, but I knew they weren't really looking. I had to get one drunk and slip him a few 50s before he finally managed to tell me. They get a few calls about the woods every year, about someone up and vanishing. But that wasn't all he wanted to tell me. Before he got up and left with the rest of his team, he wrote the Rake onto a napkin. I don't know what that meant until I searched it up on the internet. Honestly, I would never have rather known. It was a Wednesday night at my college, and some friends were bored, so we decided to take a trip from our school to Foxwoods Casino. If you've ever been there, you'll know that Foxwoods is on an Indian reservation in what can accurately be described as the middle of nowhere. There was absolutely nothing besides the casino, save some old houses. We got to the casino at around 10 p.m, 3 girls and 2 guys, and played some blackjack. At around 2 a.m, we called it quits and decided to head back to campus, which is about a 2-hour drive. The fog was really bad that night. New England fog is the worst. Then it starts to rain, and driving in that thing was no fun. I'm driving, my boy's in the passenger seat, and the 3 girls are in the back. The girls, being girls, start to comment on how dark and dreary it was outside. Also, they start to play up the Native American spiritual aspect of where we were, getting themselves all worked up. Me and my boy in the front thought it was funny, more concerned with how we were going to spend the money we'd just won in blackjack. My old GPS usually said to get on the main road at Mashantucket, means a road with some buildings near it, right away. But I was using a new one, and it said to take a different route. I was curious if there was a faster way back to the main highway, so I followed the new path. As I was making a left turn, the girls all screamed at once. I wonder what's up, and I noticed what we were turning into. Even for Nowheresville, this road was scary. There were no houses, just woods on either side. And although the road was paved, it was not well developed. Still, my GPS said we were on it for 1 mile before we had to get onto the highway, so I told the girls to relax. It was tough to see through the rain and the fog, so I had to go slowly. This wasn't fun. I noticed that there was a creepy pond to our right, and we could hear noises in the woods around us. My boy told them it was just some Connecticut deer, but they were starting to get actually scared, not just playing around. And so did I. I realized that if my car were ever to break down in this scary of a place, I was going to shit myself. But my GPS said 0.2 miles and we were out of there. And that's when the girls screamed again. I looked up. All of a sudden, the road ended and the woods began. This wasn't some construction. The road just came to an end, and the trees and such started. There was just nowhere else to go but back. At this point, I got real frightened. There were no houses or light posts around, just blackness besides my headlights. Now I needed to make a complete 180 turn and go all the way back. I turned my head to look through my back windshield to make sure I wasn't hitting any one thing, and then I saw the girls' faces start to quiver. I knew they were ready to scream again, but I didn't know to what about. I turned around. At the end of the road, staring back at us, was a dog. A skinny, brown-coloured dog of decent overall size. It was sitting right in front of us, no more than 10 feet away. And although the fog and rain were bad, we could see it clearly with my headlights on. And then I noticed it moving away, but not towards us. It hopped up on its back legs and stood upright in a very human-esque way. At this point, everyone was silent, and I knew I couldn't kick it in reverse because there was a nearby pond, and I didn't want to drive into it. I thought about just running over it. I love animals, trust me. But if you were ever in this situation, you'd think about it too. But the dog wouldn't get back down on its all fours. Instead it continued to stare, a blank dark stare, right at us. I saw as it moved its front paws towards each other, slowly, and it began to clap. I swear to God, it just stood there and clapped, slowly, staring at us, silent. Finally, it to cap off the creepiness, it sported a deranged smile, as if this was the end for us, in more than one way. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned my head around, put the car in reverse, and did a 180, and sped my way as fast as I could until we hit the main road. The ride all the way back to school was nerve-wracking. I never felt so relieved to be back at my dorm. I'll never go back to Foxwoods. I don't ever want to go near that road ever again. Number 8. A few weeks ago, my mum, sis and I went to Colorado for an entire week on vacation. We were going to drive all over the state, visit parks and go horseback riding and whitewater rafting and much more. I was excited and I sorely needed a break from work anyway. We drove 16 hours out there and spent our first day rafting down the rivers. After an exciting day, we drove to a ranch house to go horseback riding. We got there at sunset, so it was too late to ride, but we had all next day to ride the trails and see the sights. The ranch was dumpy, all run down, with scraps of steel everywhere, and the shoddy cabins that we were staying in were in desperate need for repair. I swear the roof over our shack of the cabin was a giant piece of drywall with shingles stapled to the top. My sister and I thoroughly checked the place for spiders and bugs before we even thought of bringing our luggage inside. It was only for one night, I reassured myself. Just one night in a dumpy shack on a rock-hard bed that probably had bed bugs under the sheets. I shuddered at the thought. My mum tried to cheer us up. She had brought skewers and a pack of giant beef hot dogs to roast over the communal fire pit. Happy to get out of the shack, my sister and I made a nice cosy fire, and soon a few other people from the other cabins came to sit around the fire and roast s'mores and share stories. We talked about where we were from and where we were going, and our adventures along the way. Pretty soon, stories turned into tall tales and urban legends, and the sort of stuff you'd usually tell around a bonfire. That's when I spoke up. I love stories, especially scary ones, and hey, we're out in the West. We're in Native American territory, so why not liven up the place with my favourite Indian myth, the legend of Skinwalkers. Now, for those of you who don't know, Skinwalkers are considered very evil, very dangerous beings. They were humans who gained the ability to take on the form of an animal by wearing its skin, usually through very dark and taboo magic. I knew all this and told my story. Who doesn't love a good ghost story? Everyone seemed to be enjoying it. I admit, I took some creative liberties with it, really just retelling an old werewolf story, but with a skinwalker instead. I bullshitted a lot of the story, really, and adding a few things that weren't in the myths at all. I gave our beloved frightening skinwalker wide, crazed eyes with pinpoints for pupils, with a matching insane smile. I made the skinwalker horribly misshapen, with swollen joints and arms that were too long and legs that were too short, as well as a head that never sat straight on its shoulders. I made it as terrifying as I could imagine. No one minded. They actually really liked it, and a man from Kentucky admitted the visuals alone were enough to creep him out. Victory in my book, if he'd asked me. And once I was done, everyone decided it was getting really late. Our firewood was dwindling, and it was a good time to tune in for the night. We packed up our skewers and s'mores, doused the fire, and headed into our little shacks. I tossed and turned, trying to fall asleep. I couldn't get comfortable in that damn bed. A rock was probably closer than that mattress, so against my better judgment, I got out of bed and walked about the cabin. I reasoned that if I stayed up late enough, I would be so tired that I would fall asleep no matter what I was laying on. I think. I briefly contemplated sleeping on the floor, but I wasn't that desperate yet. It was a pitch black outside. No lights from any nearby street lamps, no car headlights. Hell, not even the cabin lights were on, and I don't remember seeing a single star. It was a bit creepy, but I shrugged off the shiver creeping up my back, as simply the cold tiles were making me shake. I did, however, find it odd that there weren't any lights on the property. You'd think there'd be a floodlight on the horse stables or the main office, but no, nothing. This was really weird. I stepped outside in my flimsy foam flip-flops to get a better look. I could barely make out the ranch, and for some stupid reason, I decided to go out walking around. Eventually, my eyes adjusted to well enough to see where I could move around. I paced up and down the road where the cabins sat, and circled around to the fence and field where the horses were out grazing. Except there were no horses. Probably in the stables for the night, I reasoned. I shivered again. It was getting awfully cold. I turned right around to head back into my own cabin. It was stupid of me to be out alone at an obscene hour. I had realized I needed to get back to bed. But when I turned around, there was something in the middle of the road. Its shape was swallowed up by the surrounding darkness. I could barely make it out. It was tall and thin. I shrugged it off. It was just a pole or something else, and kept walking, but then it moved. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I could barely breathe. I just imagined it. I'm freaking myself out. Get your fucking head straight. It moved again. My paralyzed throat managed to squeak out a pathetically weak whimper as my legs began to lose strength. I shivered violently against the cold that was building up inside of me. My eyes began to focus on the impossibly dark figure standing against the barely visible sleek grey night. Now, I could see it was a person, but like nothing I had ever seen before. Its arms were impossibly long. Its legs were impossibly short. It had a torso far too long for its rail-thin body, and a head much too big for its thick neck. Its right arm was sticking out to its side, swinging up and down. Its blockish head rolled onto its left shoulder, jerkily twitched up and down, up and down. It didn't move other than that, just stood there, twitching arms, jerking up and down, head lolling around its shoulder. I stood there like the dumb fuck I was. My cabin was a few hundred yards behind that thing, and I wasn't so stupid as to try walk past it. My only opinion was to go around, behind the cabins and the stables, and hope that it didn't see me. I forced myself to lift my foot off the ground, to step backwards. My flip-flop made a wet, smacking sound as it flopped against my feet, and I immediately froze in terror. That thing stopped as well. It stood there perfectly straight, perfectly still, listening. I stayed as still as I could. My breath was shallow, and I panicked. I tried to force myself to slow my breathing before I started wheezing. My heart thundered in my chest. My whole body was shaking, but I didn't move. Neither did it. I began to slowly, so goddamn slowly, bend over and slip my feet out of those fucking flip-flops. My feet touched the dirt and the crumbly gravel, but at least now I could move silently. I spared a quick glance to the side where I was going. 2 cabins were immediately to my right. I could slip between them with ease, but there was no visible debris between them. I only looked away for a second. When I turned back, that fucking thing was gone. It was fucking gone. It fucking knew where I was. It was coming for me. Oh fuck. Yet I still couldn't fucking move. I was paralyzed. I couldn't make a move. How loud my head was screaming, "Run! Run! Run, you fuck! Run!" I heard something behind me. I turned instinctively, even though I fucking knew better than to turn around. I was greeted with two bulging eyes. Oh fuck yes. Its eyes, staring at me, unblinking, with two black pinholes for pupils, and an insane smile that was stretched far too wide to be anything remotely human. My paralysis broke as I stared at that fucking thing. I fucking ran, crying my eyes out, trying to scream, but a horrible lead weight in my throat silenced me. My feet pounded on the dirt. I stomped over anything in my way. I even impaled my foot on a sharp motherfucking rock. I didn't fucking care. I just fucking ran. I felt the cold creeping up my back. Oh my god, that cold. It was sinking right into my bones, and I couldn't stop shaking or sobbing. And I couldn't stop until I burst through my cabin doors and deadbolted the lock and leaped into my bed. I huddled under the blankets, hiding my head, and there I gasped and shook for breath, and I waited, and I didn't stop or sleep in that entire night. I was too scared. I couldn't get rid of that chill. All I thought about was that thing standing there and twitching. Morning finally broke, and I finally allowed myself the breath of relief. Whatever I had seen had not come for me, and now that it was light, it couldn't take me by surprise. Mum noticed my bleeding foot and the blood I traced through the cabin. I shrugged it off and said I'd cut myself the night before when we were making s'mores. I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push it. We left not too long after that, and as we were looking back at the place where that thing once stood, I shuddered again, but there was nothing. I assured myself there was nothing. We said goodbye to the ranchers and our companions, and I noticed the man from Kentucky, who said he had thoroughly enjoyed my story. He had told me again how much he liked it. He said he was going to tell it to some of his own kids when he got home. They really liked scary stories, he said. As we drove away, his head rolled onto his left shoulder, and he smiled an insane smile as he waved us goodbye.